On August 31st, 40 million Revolut users in Europe will see something happen to their assets without them having any say in it at all. Any USDT still held on Revolut after that date will be automatically converted into fiat at the market rate, whether the user authorized the sale or not. And here's the strange thing about this forced sale. Nobody outright banned Tether in Europe. There was no ruling and no press conference from Brussels. The largest stablecoin on earth simply declined to apply for a license to operate. Seems rather strange for a major stablecoin issuer to just walk away from a massive market, right? Well, it is strange, and that's because there's so much more to the story than people know. So today we're going to look at exactly what's happening here, why Europe pre-built the alternative before pulling the plug, and what European Central Bank is actually protecting here. Because surprise, surprise,
it's not you.
My name is DC, and this is the Coin Bureau. Okay, let's begin with the timeline on Revolut pulling the plug on Tether. Revolut announced it on July 3rd this year. Tether buys were switched off on July 6th. Deposits stopped being accepted from July 30th, and on August 31st, the full delisting lands with that automatic conversion. And when it comes to scope, this applies to the entire European Economic Area plus Switzerland. Everywhere else in Revolut's footprint, USDT carries on exactly as before. That tells you pretty quickly that this was not Revolut having an opinion about Tether. In November 2025, Revolut received a MiCA crypto asset service provider or CASP license from CySEC, the Cypriot regulator. And under MiCA, a licensed CASP is legally prohibited from offering the public any e-money token whose issuer isn't found in the authorized register. Needless to say, Tether isn't in the register, and as a result, the token had to go. But there's a much more important distinction to be made here. MiCA does not make it illegal for you to hold USDT. Self-custody is untouched and peer-to-peer transfers are not affected. Every single legal analysis you can find on this framework will tell you that exactly. The regulation governs venues and issuers, not possessions. So the asset is legal, but the on-ramp is not, which is in practice a far more effective way of removing something than banning it, because nobody ever has to defend a ban in court. And this raises the question, why did Tether just let this happen? Well, because to get authorized as an e-money token issuer in the EU, you need either a credit institution license or an electronic money institution license. And for the big ones, what MiCA calls significant e-money tokens, you have to park 60% of your reserves as deposits in EU commercial banks. That was the sticking point for Tether. Paolo Arduino has said as much over and over again, and he's even gone so far as to call that requirement dangerous. His argument is that it forces an issuer to swap the credit risk of short-dated US treasuries for uninsured exposure to commercial banks, and EU deposit insurance caps out at 100,000 euros, which against a reserve pool measured in the tens of billions is essentially nothing. And to be fair, he can point to one specific event as evidence that this is bad policy. March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank. Circle had $3.3 billion of USDC reserves stuck inside a bank that stopped existing over a weekend, and USDC, the safe, compliant, regulated one, briefly traded down to about 87 cents. So Arduino's position is that the rule designed to make stablecoins safer is the exact same rule that broke a stablecoin 3 years ago. And when it comes down to it, he's not wrong. You don't have to like Tether to notice that putting all your money in banks is not exactly good advice. Roughly 80% of USDT's reserve sit in short-dated US treasuries, and Tether would much rather keep them there. They also discontinued EURT, the euro version of USDT, rather than just restructuring it, with redemptions closing in November 2025. But before we file this under principled resistance, we have to look at one thing. On March 24th this year, Tether announced it had formally engaged a Big Four firm for its first full independent financial statement audit, moving beyond the quarterly attestations it's relied on for years. Which rather undercuts the idea that Tether is running from scrutiny. A company that can't survive an audit doesn't go looking out for one, right? So this shows a company actively choosing its jurisdiction. They're building toward the American framework, specifically the Genius Act signed on July 18, 2025, which mandates annual audits for any issuer above $50 billion. So they're walking away from the European one, and this appears to be a deliberate strategic choice. And that decision only works out the way it did because Revolut was the final domino to fall. The actual trigger date was July 1st, 2026, the day MiCA's grandfathering window slammed shut and every transitional arrangement expired. Everything before that was firms getting ahead of it. Coinbase pulled USDT for EEA users back in December 2024. Crypto.com removed it along with 9 other tokens in January 2025. Binance restricted regulated USDT spot pairs in the EEA in March 2025, with Kraken and OKX moving in the same window. Bitvavo, Bitstamp, and Bit2Me all cleared non-compliant dollar and euro tokens off their books ahead of the deadline. So by the time Revolut sent that notice, the token had already been swept off essentially every regulated Western venue. Revolut was simply the last consumer surface standing. But there's one other number that might change your outlook on this entire situation, and it has nothing to do with stablecoins at all. Of roughly 1,200 firms previously registered across the EU under national regimes, only around 210 converted to full CASP authorization. That's an 83% attrition rate, and that pattern is clear as day everywhere across the whole EEA. Estonia alone went from 641 registered providers in 2021 down to about 40 by early 2025.
What if you could trade real US stocks like Apple, Nvidia, or Tesla without leaving your crypto account? Well, that's the idea behind R tokens from BitGet. These are tokenized stocks backed one-to-one by real shares, but the key difference is they are actually usable. You can trade them, use them as margin, and even earn dividends instead of just letting them sit in your wallet. So, if you want to check them out for yourself, sign up for BitGet using the link in the description or by scanning this QR code.
Only 16 of the world's 100 largest exchanges by volume hold a MiCA license at all. So Europe effectively filtered the entire industry. And depending where you stand, this is either a good thing or a bad thing. But Tether is the most valuable thing caught in a net that was catching pretty much everything. Now, the obvious objection here is that removing the world's biggest stablecoin from a 450 million person economy should have caused chaos. But it didn't. And the reason it didn't is that the replacement was built first. Here comes Circle. Circle Mint Europe holds an electronic money institution license from the ACPR, the French regulator granted back in July 2024. And under MiCA, that single license passports across the entire bloc. So USDC became the default compliant crypto dollar in Europe by being the one that filed the paperwork. Then came the institutional signal. On June 30th this year, BNY Mellon integrated USDC directly into its digital asset custody platform. Institutional clients can now hold, transfer, mint, and burn USDC and swap between dollars and USDC without ever leaving the bank's own infrastructure. When the oldest bank in America builds a stablecoin into its custody stack, it becomes a permanent feature. On the euro side, the numbers are smaller, but the trajectory is pretty undeniable. EURC, the euro equivalent of USDC, almost doubled in supply across 2026, from around 200 million at the start of the year to approximately 380 million by mid-year, taking the dominant share of the compliant euro market. Société Générale's EURCVs up over 200% year-on-year to about 105 million euro, and crucially, that one is issued under a credit institution framework, a licensed bank. Behind them are Quantos, which issues EURQ and USDQ under Dutch central bank supervision. Banking Circle with EURI, and Membrane, whose Euro-E is authorized by Finland's regulator. Just to put things into perspective, at the start of 2026, there were 5 MiCA-compliant euro stablecoins. By June, there were already 8. And the compliant euro stablecoin market as a whole grew 128% between June 2025 and June 2026, from roughly $295 million to around $673 million. Still small, but growing incredibly fast. However, there's one other name to take note of in this big sectoral shift: Quibblis. In December 2025, 12 European banks founded a consortium to issue their own euro stablecoin. By May of this year, 25 more banks joined in a single wave. It now stands at 37 institutions across 15 countries. BNP Paribas, ING, UniCredit, and many, many more. They've applied for an EMI license from the Dutch central bank. They've picked Fireblocks for the custody and tokenization infrastructure, and they're targeting a launch in the second half of this year. So what's really happening here? Well, Europe is clearing a lane. And banks driving into that lane are more than happy to do so because their deposit base is threatened by dollar stablecoins. Now, when it comes to Tether in specific, there's plenty of commentary about outflows and liquidity migrating toward USDC and EURC. But that commentary isn't evidence. What we can do is look at the high-level figures to get a sense of how this truly impacted the stablecoin market. USDT's global market cap sits at roughly $187 billion. That's still roughly 60% of the entire stablecoin market. It contracted about $5.4 billion between May and July this year, but that's a global figure. And USDT is growing hard through Asia, Africa, and Latin America, so you can't really pin that on Europe. Meanwhile, on-chain stablecoin volume hit a record of $1.79 trillion in June, even while total supply contracted. And well, that looks like consolidation. What Europe actually produced is a two-track market. Regulated Western venues running on compliant assets, offshore and emerging market venues running on USDT. Europe targeted the venues while leaving the asset alone, and the real friction is actually found inside the compliant cap. There's a live proposal that would restrict certain institutional on-chain settlements to tokens issued by credit institutions, which would hand the advantage straight to the banks and disadvantage to issuers like Circle. One policy paper from May this year argues MiCA's liquidity rules are actively hurting the competitiveness of euro tokens. The industry is pushing back hard, so the rules are still being sharpened. But once you see who they're being sharpened in favor of, the whole thing stops to look like crypto policy, because listen to what the European Central Bank has been saying. Christine Lagarde has been warning about digital dollarization, that foreign-denominated stablecoins threaten monetary policy transmission and can pull deposits straight out of European banks. Piero Cipollone, a member of the ECB's executive board, said on July 17th that the threat is to commercial banks' retail deposit base, their funding costs, and visibility over payments. His stated solution is a digital euro that is capped and deliberately non-interest bearing, designed from the ground up so it can never actually become a savings vehicle that drains the banks it's meant to protect. But by far the sharpest line came from Isabel Schnabel on June 1st in a keynote in Seoul. She compared stablecoins to 1970s American money market funds. Both promise redemption at par and both invest in short-term assets, and both, she argued, pull deposits out of the banking system and create bank run risk on the way. So according to EU policymakers themselves, this is fundamentally a deposit flight problem, and that makes even more sense when you consider the timing. The digital euro preparation phase wrapped up in late October 2025. In July this year, the ECB selected 36 payment providers for its pilot, including Deutsche Bank, Stripe, and yes, Revolut. The same company auto-converting your USDT is piloting the state's alternative. So the 12-month pilot runs from the second half of 2026 with issuance targeted for 2029. And there's one more stat that drives this home. Between 98 and 99% of all stablecoins are dollar denominated. A currency block watching its entire digital payment layer get denominated in someone else's money is facing a sovereignty problem. It responded in a way you'd more or less expect a sovereign to respond, and it appears that Europe has set a bit of a standard on this. The UK's FCA is building a regime around reserve backing and local authorization, with its regulatory gateway expected to open in September this year. Hong Kong's stablecoins ordinance took effect in August 2025, and the HKMA issued its first 2 licenses in April this year, including to HSBC. Singapore requires monthly attestations and redemption at par within 5 business days. Japan runs a fiat-referenced regime with local issuer accountability. So the general idea is to license, localize, and hold entities accountable. But then there's Washington doing pretty much the exact opposite. The Genius Act carved compliant payment stablecoins out from under the SEC and CFTC entirely, handing oversight to the banking regulators. Reserves can be treasuries, repos, or Fed account credits with no mandated minimum sitting in bank deposits at all. So compare that to MiCA's 60% requirement, and you're looking at the precise rule Tether refused to accept, absent from the American framework by design. And a 2026 executive order went even further, explicitly prioritizing the global promotion of lawful dollar-backed stablecoins, openly presented as making these things a structural buy of US treasuries. So there are now 2 templates on the table: license and promote, or license and exclude. Washington is exporting dollar stablecoins while Brussels is filtering them. And every other jurisdiction on the planet is currently picking a side. For a decade, the question that determined whether a stablecoin would win market share was whether it could get users liquidity. And Tether won that race so comprehensively it isn't even close. $187 billion and 60% of the entire market. But in Europe, it lost anyway because the new bar for existing at scale is authorization. And look who rushed into the space that opened up. 37 banks didn't join a consortium to build something they think is useless. BNY Mellon didn't wire USDC into its custody platform for a technology it expects to disappear. There's no denying it. The largest financial institutions in Europe are competing to issue regulated tokens because they've decided stablecoins are permanent infrastructure. Tether's time in Europe may have ended, but stablecoins are only just beginning. But what do you think? Does Europe's model become the global default, or does the American approach of aggressively promoting dollar stablecoins abroad simply steamroll it? Please get highly opinionated in the comments and let us know. And if you want the full picture of how Micah reshaped this entire market, then you should definitely check out our breakdown right over here. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC, signing